Discussing the Indian pantheon is tricky for two reasons. First, because it remains a living belief system for about 1 billion people. And second, because Indian religious and mythic traditions are not only abundant, but also ancient. As in Egypt, there are different sets of gods and goddesses that were worshipped at different points in time. But unlike Egypt, India was and is home to many different languages, which means we have a lot of different stories, each with many different variations. We are going to focus mostly on stories that have been written in Sanskrit, the sacred language of Hinduism. Sanskrit first appears in written form around 150 CE in a series of rock inscriptions that look a lot more complex than what I have inscribed on rocks. In the earliest Indian traditions, Dios, the Sky Father, and Prithvi, the Earth Mother, were central. Hey! Sky Dad and Earth Mom, nice to see you over here too. Do you mind if I drop off some cosmic laundry? Later, however, Surya, the sun god, Agni, the fire god, and Indra, the warrior king of the gods, took top god billing from Mom and Dad, who were arguing all the time. Indra was the child of the sky and the earth, and was responsible for keeping them separate, but had his own beef with another god, Varuna, who may once have been the ruler of the gods, but was supplanted by Indra. The most well-known myth about Indra is about his battle with Vritra, a giant serpent or dragon whom Indra kills, thus creating the sun, the dawn, and the sky. Yeah, I know, you thought that we had sky covered, but mythology is tricky. The death of Vritra also gave form to chaos. In a number of stories, Indra is described as battling and destroying hostile minor deities and demons. I mean, someone has to do it, right? And so maybe you're thinking, yay, Indra, he fights the good fight. But he also breaks oaths, kills family members. Indra's weapon of choice is a thunderbolt, similar to Zeus, and by India's classical age, he becomes a god of rain. And this changing function over time is generally emblematic of Indian myth. Like the Egyptian pantheon, it's difficult to pin down one canonical set of myths or characters because they appear in so many forms, often with multiple names. Here's another version of how things get going. In the Vedas, which are the most ancient Hindu scriptures, Prajapati was the creator god. But over time, and especially in the Upanishads, another collection of important Sanskrit texts, the less anthropomorphic concept of Brahman developed. Brahman isn't a god so much as the all-encompassing essence of reality, the supreme cosmic spirit. It's not something you can easily represent on a sandstone relief, but then again, it's not that dissimilar from God in the monotheistic religious traditions. Brahman has sometimes been translated as the world soul, and all individual souls are one with it. Don't get too comfortable though, because Brahman, in later classical Hindu mythology and religion, is embodied and personified as 3 deities. Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. They're all distinct with their own stories. This triumvirate, the trifecta divine hat trick, Hindus call it the Trimūrti. And Vishnu and Shiva loom largest in Indian myths. So then, why is Brahma third banana? Well, once the universe is created, the work of the creator is done. True, the concept of cyclical existence is central to Hindu and Buddhist worldview, so you'd think a creator would be considered among the most important gods. Still though, Brahma's significance declined in comparison with that of Vishnu and Shiva, perhaps because, according to John Brockington, essentially he is a fusion of a creator deity with the impersonal Brahman propounded in the Upanishads, which see the goal of religious endeavor as some kind of union with the absolute. Whereas the popular forms of religion attested to in the epics prefer a more personal and devotional approach. In other words, Brahma doesn't really get involved in the juicy stuff, battles and quests and adultery. So let's turn to Vishnu, the preserver. Stories of Vishnu often involve his consort Shri, also called Lakshmi, a goddess of prosperity and good fortune, which is pretty terrific as far as dowries go. Vishnu protects the world from evil, and he often appears in different forms called avatars. Avatars are the human or animal form of a god on Earth, and they are very, very rad. By the classical period, Vishnu had 10 or so avatars. Matsya, the fish, who we'll talk more about when we talk about floods. Kurma, the tortoise, who played a role similar to the tortoise in the Earth Diver myth that we saw. Varaha, the boar, who is a boar and does Bore stuff. Narasimha, the man-lion who kills the demon Hiranyakashipu. Vamana, the dwarf who defeats the demon Bai through trickery. Parashurama, who kills the 100-armed Arjuna with an axe and probably has amazing biceps. Rama and Krishna, who are central to the Mahabharata, one of the great Sanskrit epics. The Buddha, who is the Buddha, from Buddhism. Kalki, who is a future avatar and a millennial figure that will establish a new era. Shiva the Destroyer had his origins in the Vedic era as a storm god who was a wrathful avenger and a herdsman of souls. We spent most of the episode discussing 3 key gods of the Trimūrti and their amazing dance moves, but Indian pantheons feature goddesses too, who usually have qualities that complement their husband's powers. I mentioned Parvati and Uma and Sati, the wives of Shiva, and Lakshmi, who is married to Vishnu, but other traditions describe the goddess Devi, which translates to goddess, or Mahadevi, the great goddess, who is occasionally associated with the other consorts and sometimes seen as a world creator in her own right. In some traditions, Devi is essentially the same as Brahman. Like many of the deities we discuss, Devi can be many things to many people. This episode could only scratch the surface of the complexity of Indian mythology. Not only does it come from so many sources, but for many people these are living myths.
So the Mughals were Muslims who created an empire in India that held power for roughly 200 years between the early 16th and early 18th centuries, although technically the Mughal Empire didn't come to an end until after the Indian Rebellion against the British in 1857. Now the Mughals weren't the first Muslims in India, those would have been merchants, and they weren't even the first Muslims to rule significant parts of India. That honor goes to the Delhi Sultanate, which began in 1206 in northern India. But the Delhi Sultanate didn't last very long and was replaced by a bunch of regional kingdoms, and one of them, the Lodi Sultanate, had the misfortune of falling to the founder of the Mughal Dynasty, Babur, in 1526. Not Babar, although that would have been awesome. Babur was descended from Timur, the last great Central Asian conqueror in the Mongol tradition, and also from Chinggis Khan, which explains why Babur and his followers are called the Mughals. It's the Persian Arabic word for Mongols. Now I know what you're saying, something like 12% of human beings currently living in the world are descended from Chinggis Khan, but Babur got it on the ground floor. The Mughal Empire is really important in India's cultural history. I mean, the Taj Mahal was built during this time. In architecture and painting, we see a blending of Indian and Persian styles that demonstrate how cosmopolitan the empire was. But probably the most important aspect of the Mughals, at least as far as the contemporary world is concerned, is that they consolidated Muslim rule over much of India, and they're largely the reason that today there are so many Indians who are also Muslims. And the Mughals were also a really interesting example of how to build and maintain an empire. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. Muslims were a small minority ruling class vastly outnumbered by Hindus, and like many empires, they relied on military power and pursued expansionist policies. Like most of the Mughal rulers, especially Akbar and Aurangzeb, spent a considerable amount of time trying to extend Mughal control over the entire Indian subcontinent, and they created a pretty effective empire. They were able to incorporate Indian princes into the ruling class while still retaining top positions for Muslims. They reorganized the bureaucracy and instituted an effective tax collection system, which was important because the empire was, of course, very expensive to run, as empires always are. This meant it was important to make accurate tax assessments, and taxes were usually collected by local leaders called Zamindars. Taxes had to be paid in cash, and this contributed to the growing commercialization of the Mughal Empire. Reliance on zamindars, who were important men in their communities, meant that the empire could collect revenue without being too disruptive to local village life. And although almost all of the revenue came from taxes on agriculture, the Mughals also taxed trade. Another way that the Mughals were a typical empire is that their rulers engaged in building projects to enhance their prestige. From Persepolis to Rome to the Forbidden City, building monuments to one's greatness is what emperors do, and the Mughals were no exception. As Muslims, many of their building projects were mosques, but the Mughals also built forts and, most spectacularly, mausoleums.